Right now, somewhere in your bloodstream, there's a signature you've almost certainly never heard of, and for most of your life, no doctor ever bothered to mention it. You know your blood type as a letter, maybe an A, maybe an O, maybe with a little plus or minus stuck on the end. That's the version printed on a donor card, the version a nurse scribbles onto a chart. But that letter is only the cover of the book. Underneath it, your red blood cells are carrying dozens of other markers, tiny molecular flags studding their surface. And one of them isn't an administrative detail at all, it's a war medal. It was forged in a fight that began tens of thousands of years ago against an enemy no eye can see in a place you've probably never set foot. And whether or not you carry it quietly records a survival story written into your family long before anyone in it could write a single word. It's called the Duffy blood group, and once you understand what it actually is, you will never look at that little card in your wallet the same way again. Here's how it entered the record. In 1950, in a London hospital, doctors were treating a man with hemophilia who'd received transfusion after transfusion. His body, flooded with other people's blood, had started manufacturing a strange new antibody, one nobody had catalogued before. It was reacting to a marker on red blood cells that science didn't yet have a name for. So, as often happens in medicine, they simply named it after the patient. His name was Duffy. That's it. That's the whole origin of the term. A previously invisible feature of human blood sitting on every one of your red cells or absent from all of them got its name almost by accident from one sick man in one hospital ward. For a while, that's all it was, another entry in the blood typing catalog. A curiosity, filed and forgotten. But here's where it gets strange, because a couple of decades later, geneticists started mapping which populations carried the Duffy marker and which didn't, and the map made no sense. In most of the world, most people are Duffy positive. Their red cells display the marker openly. But when researchers looked across huge stretches of West and Central Africa, the pattern flipped so hard it looked like an error. In some populations, nearly 100% of people were Duffy negative. Not most, not a strong majority, nearly every single person. An entire region of the planet where this marker had simply vanished from human blood, driven down to almost nothing, while just about everywhere else it stayed common. Genetics doesn't do that by chance. When a trait swings to near total frequency across millions of people in one place and stays rare everywhere else, it isn't an accident. It's a fingerprint. Something enormous pressed down on those bodies for a very long time and left this mark. The question was, what? And the answer turned out to be smaller than a grain of dust and more lethal than any predator that ever walked. Malaria. But not the strain most people picture. There are several species of malaria parasite, and the one that matters here is called Plasmodium vivax. To survive, this parasite has to break into your red blood cells. That's its entire life strategy. It can't just float in the blood, it has to get inside a cell, hide there, feed, and multiply. And to get in, it needs a door. A specific molecular doorway it can grab, twist open, and slip through. And the doorway it evolved to use, over untold generations of latching onto human blood, is the Duffy marker. That exact same marker discovered by accident in a London ward. To Plasmodium vivax, the Duffy protein isn't a curiosity at all. It's the keyhole. Its whole invasion is built like a key ground down to fit one lock. So now, sit with what that means for a body that has no Duffy marker at all. The parasite arrives, it circulates, it finds a red blood cell and reaches for the door it always uses, and the door isn't there. The keyhole has been sealed shut. It can't get a grip, it can't get inside, it can't feed or multiply, it simply dies in the bloodstream, locked out of the only home it knows. A person who is Duffy negative is, against this particular killer, almost completely resistant. The parasite is holding a key to a lock that no longer exists. This wasn't a guess. In 1976, a researcher named Louis Miller ran the experiment that nailed it down, deliberately exposing volunteers to the parasite and finding that the Duffy-negative individuals stayed protected while others didn't. The keyhole was gone, and Vivax couldn't touch them. That single study reframed everything. It meant that across all those generations in Africa, malaria had been silently auditioning every human body it could find, and the bodies that happened to lack the doorway lived, had children, and passed that sealed door to the next generation, while the bodies that had it were far more likely to be broken by fever before they ever became someone's ancestor. Push that pressure across enough centuries, and you don't just get a common trait, you get near 100%. You get an entire region where the door has been bricked over in almost every person alive. That's what the impossible map was. It was the receipt for tens of thousands of years of an invisible war. And this is where history got the story completely backward. For a long time, the medical world looked at that same region and concluded something simple and wrong. They noticed that Vivax malaria was strangely scarce across much of sub-Saharan Africa, and they assumed the parasite just didn't live there. A quirk of geography, a gap on the map. The bug simply wasn't present, they figured, and that was that. But that assumption had it exactly upside down. The parasite wasn't missing from the environment, it was being locked out of the people. Vivax could arrive all it wanted, but it was arriving at a continent full of sealed doors. The scarcity everyone had chalked up to geography was actually the shadow of a genetic shield worn by nearly every person there. Science had mistaken a victory for an absence. It took reading the DNA itself, the actual genetic switch that turns the Duffy marker off, to flip that story right side up. And the switch is beautifully small, essentially a single letter change in a stretch of DNA that acts like an on/off toggle for the gene in red blood cells. One tiny edit. The door quietly never gets built. The parasite never gets in. But nature is an accountant, and it never hands you a gift without also handing you a bill. Because that Duffy marker wasn't sitting on your cells doing nothing before evolution switched it off. In the rest of the body, it has a real job. It helps manage signaling molecules, acting a bit like a sponge or a docking station for the little chemical messages that coordinate inflammation. Turn it off in the blood, and you nudge some of that machinery. The best documented cost is subtle but real. Many Duffy-negative people run naturally lower counts of a certain type of immune cell, a completely benign trait on its own, but one that has confused countless doctors who saw the low number on a lab report and assumed something was wrong when nothing was. Researchers have looked hard for bigger costs too, probing whether switching off this marker changes vulnerability to other infections or conditions, and some of those links are still genuinely debated, still being argued over in the literature. That honesty matters. But the headline trade is clear enough. To slam the door on one of humanity's oldest killers, the body gave up a small piece of molecular housekeeping, a shield in one hand, a modest bill in the other. That's the deal evolution offered, and across that region, generation after generation took it, because the alternative was fever, and the alternative was dying young. And if your own blood is starting to feel a little more crowded with history than you expected, if that letter on your donor card suddenly seems like the smallest part of the story, then stick around, because this is exactly the kind of hidden history we dig into here every week. Subscribe and come with me, because the strangest part of the Duffy story isn't the door, or the parasite, or the sealed continent. It's where the door came from and where it's going next, so let's follow it back. That single genetic switch, the one that turns the marker off, didn't appear all over the world at once. The evidence points to it arising in Africa and then being driven upward relentlessly by the pressure of a Vivax-like parasite gnawing at human blood over an immense span of time, likely tens of thousands of years, though geneticists still argue about the exact timing. Picture that stretch of deep prehistory, people living, having children, burying the ones the fevers took, while a mutation that happened to seal one molecular door slowly became the difference between a bloodline that continued and one that didn't. Nobody chose it, nobody understood it. There were no microscopes, no parasites anyone could name, no theory of what was happening. There was only fever and survival and the quiet arithmetic of who lived long enough to pass their blood forward. Over enough centuries, that arithmetic rewrote an entire population's blood from the inside out. The door didn't spread because anyone wanted it. It spread because the people carrying it kept surviving the thing that killed the people who didn't. And then those people moved, as humans always have, carrying that sealed door in their veins across continents and centuries, through migrations and diasporas, until it turned up in the bloodstreams of their descendants scattered all over the modern world. Which means a person alive today, thousands of miles from where any of this happened, can still carry the exact genetic echo of a war their ancestors fought against a parasite they never saw. The metal got passed down, it's just that nobody told the people wearing it what it was for. But here's the twist that keeps me up at night, because the story isn't finished and the enemy didn't quit. For decades, the rule seemed absolute. No Duffy marker, no Vivax infection. Sealed door, locked out, end of story. And then, in the last several years, that rule started to crack. Researchers in places like Madagascar and parts of East Africa began documenting something that wasn't supposed to be possible: Duffy-negative people getting infected with Vivax anyway. The parasite, it seems, is doing what parasites do best. It's evolving. It's fumbling for a new way in, a back door, an alternate route past the lock that held it out for tens of thousands of years. And I cannot stress this enough. This is the same evolutionary game that sealed the door in the first place, just running in the other direction now. The shield your ancestors spent an ice age's worth of time building isn't necessarily permanent. The war that gave you your blood is still being fought, in real time, right now, in the bloodstreams of living people. Scientists are watching it happen. So now, look down. If you're one of the people who carries this, and millions do, then that sealed door on your red blood cells is not a defect, and it is not a footnote. It's the surviving evidence of an unbroken chain of ancestors who stood in the path of one of the deadliest organisms our species has ever faced and simply did not break. Every one of them lived long enough to hand the next one this exact piece of blood. The fever came, and it came, and it came, and the line held all the way down to you. And if you don't carry it, that's a survival story too, written by different ancestors against different enemies, in a different corner of the same long war that every human alive descends from. There is no better blood here, and no worse. There's only the astonishing fact that all of us are standing at the end of a fight none of us can remember, wearing the results in cells we never think about. That's what that letter on the card was hiding. Not one blood type, a whole buried history of survival, written in a language medicine only recently learned to read. So before we close this chapter, drop a comment and tell me, what's your blood type and where in the world is your family from? Because somewhere behind that answer is a story exactly like this one, waiting to be read. You are carrying deep time in your veins. You always were. You just finally got to see the page it was written on.